Well, good Thursday morning. Welcome to another morning of 10 with Tom, and glad to be with you this morning. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that we don't usually deal with when we're teenagers, but as we get older, it becomes quite the temptation to get involved in it, and it can really put a damper on our lives. And that thing is debt. Depending on what kind of tradition you grew up in, when we say the Lord's Prayer, we talk about forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But I've heard from many people through the years that the more literal translation is forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And so debts is something that go back a long time. It's when we owe something. And back in biblical times, if you had a debt that you couldn't pay, you could be placed in prison, and your note that you owed would be posted on a wall, on a debtor's wall. And you would remain in jail until the point where you could finally pay that debt. Well, the only way you could pay that debt when you were in jail was if somebody paid it for you. Maybe your family worked to get the money to pay for it, or somebody who just had compassion might use some of the money that they had to pay off the debt of somebody who owed something. So debt's been a problem since way back. And of course, when it comes to sin, we had that debt of sin that Jesus paid for us. And so that's where that all comes together. That Jesus paid our debt of sin. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to pay our debts of cash, or in a lot of cases today, credit. So debt is something that can be very, very serious. I can remember going to college, and a lot of places you would go, they would have advertisements for credit cards. And they would try and entice you to get a credit card with some kind of a special gift. Maybe it was a jacket, maybe it was a bag, like a sports bag, maybe it was a t-shirt, but they would try and find ways to entice you to sign up for a credit card. And the idea was you get a credit card, then for a college student, a lot of times that meant, hey, we have free money. But you know what? That free money doesn't work that way, because when you use your credit card, you have to pay it back. You don't just go out and buy anything you want and it's free. You owe on it. And if you don't pay it right away at the first opportunity, then you get stuck paying interest, which means you pay more than the item is worth. And the more you put on credit, the more you pay on interest. And it can be harder and harder to make ends meet. And so we had a friend who got a credit card when they were in college, and they thought it was the most wonderful thing ever, because they had a credit limit of about $5,000. And so they started charging things on their credit card, and when the bill came, it said that their minimum payment due was $15. They got all that stuff for $15. So all they needed to do was pay $15 a month, and they could keep buying stuff on the card. And so they did. They kept making the minimum payment, which meant interest was growing, the number of things on that credit card was growing, and they just kept paying that minimum payment every month until all of a sudden they were over $20,000 in debt. And it took them a long, long time to pay that off. Which meant they couldn't do a lot of the other things that they wanted to do, because now they were trying to pay off all this debt. Now, anybody who's gone to college and had to pay for college realizes that college is expensive. And sometimes you can get very, very far in debt as you go to college. I had a friend who decided to start college locally and spent a year at community college. Then they decided they wanted to go to Florida State. Well, they didn't live in Florida, and so they paid out-of-state tuition to go to Florida State, and they went there for 1 year. Then they realized this is too expensive. So they returned to their home state, but then they went to a private university. Now, if you know anything about colleges, private universities cost more than public universities. Well, they graduated from the private school. Then they decided they wanted to go to graduate school. Well, graduate school still costs money. And so by the time they finished graduate school, they were over $80,000 in debt. And then they got a job that helped them pay the bills, but it didn't leave a whole lot left over to keep working on that debt. And so they got to the point where they were paying the interest every month, but the debt wasn't going away. And so here that person is 30 years later, and they're still way in debt. All right, so how do we avoid debt? One of the first ways is not to accumulate it at all. One of the lessons that my parents taught me was if you use your credit card, pay it off at the end of the month. Don't buy anything on credit that you can't afford to pay off in a month. And the only exceptions we've ever had to that was our house and a car. And the only reason we bought the car on credit, we had money to pay it off, but we actually got a better deal if we financed it for a year than if we'd have paid cash for it. So we financed it for a year, saved the money, and all was good because we already had the money in the bank to pay for it. So our house was the only thing we've ever really gone into debt for. And Deb is wonderful at managing money, and we were able to pay off our 30-year mortgage in 17 years. And so our house is now totally paid off. But I was doing some reading from a young lady named Crystal Walker, and she had some great tips on how to live out avoiding debt. Number one, avoid debt by not carrying your credit cards in your wallet. What? Isn't that what credit cards are for? But I think her point is, if you have access to credit all the time, you're more likely to spend it. And something that someone taught me in college was, if you go shopping and you see something and you want to buy it, if you have a credit card, you just whip out the credit card and it's yours, but you still have to pay for it. If you don't have your credit card with you, you have to go home and you have to think about, is this worth a second trip? If I still want it after I've driven home and I'm willing to drive back and get it, then maybe we can consider making the purchase. And in this day of online shopping, somebody suggested wait 30 days. If you see something you really want, wait 30 days, and then if you still want it, then get it. So make sure it's something that you really need. Okay. Secondly, if something is broken, try to fix it before you buy a new one, or buy used items at thrift stores, or in things like Craigslist. As we find things like that, we can save a lot of money that way rather than buying everything new. I've already mentioned the 30-day rule in conjunction with the credit cards. Write a list before you go grocery shopping and stick to the items on the list. I'm terrible at that because I have a list of 10 things and I come home with 25. Did I need all those things that I bought? Probably not. They were things that looked good at the time. It's like, oh yeah, I'll just get those, and then I got my credit card, boom, we're all right. So that can be something that's difficult to do. But if you can stick to your list, all right. Also, plan on paying with cash. That limits how much you can spend. And I know a lot of places right now are trying to go cashless, but cash can help us manage our money. Buy a good coffee maker and some quality coffee rather than buying expensive drinks on a daily basis. A cup of coffee at Starbucks or Dunkin', those add up after a while compared to just getting some coffee at home. Is it okay to splurge once in a while? Sure. But you can save a lot of money by not making that a daily habit. Another important thing, put some money into a savings account every month, even if it's just $5 or $10. But get into the habit of saving and let the savings add up. It's amazing the impact it can have. A little bit at a time turns out to be a lot later. All right. Instead of taking your credit card when you're going on a trip and just buying things as you go, how about saving money in advance and look for deals during that time where you're saving so that when you go on the trip, you get more out of the trip and probably spend less. And I can remember going on a trip to Florida one time, and I planned on going for a week, and I had $1,000 with me, and at the end of the week, I still had money left over. And I called my boss and I said, can I spend a couple extra days because I still have money left? And he said, sure. But I had budgeted for that, and so I was able to do that. But had I just gone with my credit card and not paying attention, I probably would have spent a lot more money that I wouldn't have had, and I wouldn't have had the extra time of vacation. Pay off student loans very faithfully. Do it as soon as you can. Stay with it. Otherwise, it can burn your credit score. And when you get an opportunity to take a class on financial management, whether it's at a church, in a college, or at your high school, learn how to deal with finances. As we avoid debt, we can do so much more with our money. And so keep that in mind now. Learn that lesson while you're young. because it's a lesson that'll stay with you and benefit you your entire life. And before we go today, I'd just like to ask everybody to pray for me tonight as I share with the youth on the Reverb Youth Retreat. I'll be speaking to the boys group tonight, and I just hope that you'll pray with me and that we have a productive time as I share God's Word with them. And it's going to be a great retreat, and I look forward to seeing all of you guys this weekend. So thanks for joining us today on 10 with Tom. Have a wonderful weekend. Hope to see you Sunday in worship. I love you guys.